Welcome to this Vault edition of Paul's Security Weekly. This episode, Dr. Whitfield Diffie is the featured interview. Dr. Diffie is one of the pioneers of course, public key cryptography. You may recognize him as the Diffie in the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. At the time of this interview, Dr. Diffie was the VP of Information Security and Cryptography at ICANN. We discuss various subjects in this interview, including, but not limited to, the start of his career, the development of the Diffie-Hellman algorithm, the state of cryptography at the time, and the challenges faced in software security. My co-hosts for this segment were Geoff Thayer, Carlos Perez, Jack Daniel, and Larry Pesce. Now, on to the interview with Whitfield Diffie. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Whit Diffie. Dr. Whit Diffie is a pioneer of public key cryptography and was the VP of Information Security and Cryptography at ICANN. He's also the author of Privacy on the Line, The Politics of Wiretapping and Encryption. Welcome, Whit, to the show.
Thank you.
So, Whit, how did you get your start in...
So why do I hear a ghostly voice talking against you?
It's Gremlins?
Probably. I mean, it sounds like the host of a horror movie show.
Really? That's interesting. Maybe it's the voices in my head leaking through into my microphone.
No. It had something to do... When I said earlier I'd put my hand over my microphone, I pressed it, and in fact, it clicked.
Okay.
And that changed something. I don't know what there is here to change, but all right. Now everything's fine.
Good.
Except that
You missed the question?
I want a copy of your book for my fee.
We will...
Offensive Countermeasures, and I'll give you a soundbite in return.
Okay.
This should be called Pretaliation.
Oh,
I'm going to pretaliate against these people.
Brilliant.
We will send you a copy of our book. Absolutely.
Now, do you want the lower value
Did you want
signed
the signed copy or the unsigned?
I'll have a lower value signed copy
Okay.
and a supplementary PDF.
Okay, absolutely.
One to put on my bookshelf to look good and one to read.
There you go. So how did you get your start in information security?
The key point was that in about this time in 1972, Larry Roberts, who was funding the ARPANET, went to see Howard Rosenblum, who was Deputy Director for Information Security or Communication Security at NSA, and said, we have this $100 million a year military communications research activity. We should think about security. And I assume they agreed on that, but they couldn't agree on anything else because Roberts didn't want to support any secret work, and Rosenblum didn't want to do anything else. So Roberts goes back to his office in Roslyn. He has a job where his PIs come by with their hats in their hands, and they have to listen to whatever he wants to talk about. So that week he talked about network security, and my boss John McCarthy came by and got an earful and came home and gave us an earful back home. And I got started up in the subject, and still working on it. 40 years later?
So, what advice do you have?
The other thing you should have to is to have the waiter bring me a drink, please.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have to find a local courier service to bring our guests drinks. That's a fantastic suggestion.
I see. That looked to me like a champagne glass. I'll think about getting a nice beer later.
There you go.
Yes.
So
we need like an Uber for beverages.
Yeah. Yes. So for people just getting started out in the field, what advice do you have for them to get started in this field of security?
We'll work in some broader field like bioengineering.
So,
I mean, it's pretty seriously. I think security. In parallel with what somebody used to say on the Tonight Show, baseball have been very good to me. I've done pretty well off security, but it's not the be-all and end-all of the world. And if you're starting a career, I would think about starting a career in something really fundamental. Gene line engineering, linguistics, I don't know, but if you insist on going into security, well, the thing, biting me these last few years is that for roughly the last 40 years, we've been working on what's called the confinement problem, executing software without allowing it to harm you,
Mm.
and that problem is still unsolved.
No, yeah, that's an excellent point. Absolutely. Um, so what led you to start working on a new cryptographic algorithm that led to public key cryptography?
See the answer to question one?
So
Um,
my other question is, we all know the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. So explain how the Hellman
Okay.
part got on there.
Okay.
How's that?
So let me start by summarizing. There actually are another two sources of this activity. In 1965, I was talking to a friend who was doing a lot of work with NSA, and I began to wonder how they secured the telephones in their own building. The answer, incidentally, is that they run them in shielded conduit. But
Mhm.
I couldn't. I assumed you'd want to encrypt them, and what I couldn't see was how to encrypt them in such a way that every individual phone call was secured against everybody else in the world. And so I didn't see how to solve that, and I put it in the back of my mind because I wasn't working on cryptography. And then in late 1969, I came here to Stanford. I was working for the aforementioned John McCarthy, but when I arrived, he was off in Bordeaux giving a paper on what we would now call internet commerce. So he came back and he was talking about this stuff, and I got to thinking about what you would do for signatures in a paperless office. And I didn't know how to do that either. And the problem being that we depend on uniqueness of signatures, but digital things can always be copied perfectly. And so in the spring of 1975, after I had been working on cryptography, uh, in two events within a few days of each other, I suddenly realized that one thing would solve both of these problems that I had been thinking about on the back of my mind, one for 10 years and one for 5, and the result was what's called public key cryptography. Um, how Hellman came into it is that at one point I went to visit Alan Tritter at IBM Yorktown Heights. I was introduced to him uh, by the son of my mentor and boss, at the first job I'd held, and Tritter, who I don't know if you still know him, he was a great phone freak in the early days, and he called himself the biggest man in computer science. That is, he weighed 500 pounds, bigger than Joel Moses by, say, 50%. And uh, he introduced me to his boss, was Alan Conheim, and Alan Conheim was very secretive. He wouldn't tell me anything. He only told me one thing, and then now he's wished he'd never said that. Uh, Conheim said, we can't tell you anything about what we're doing here, but my old friend Marty Hellman was around here a few months ago, and I couldn't tell him anything either. But you should go look him up when you get back to the West Coast, because two people can work on a problem better than one. And I came back out here. I called Hellman. He graciously granted me half an hour of his time between 4:30 and 5. My wife and I drove down, and she dropped me off. She went off and did something, and she called back in around 5:30, and we were still talking. And he invited us to dinner at his place, and we were still, we finally left around 11, and the two of us then worked together for 4 years, and became a great pain in Alan Conheim's ample tush. Because his group is one of the key groups in the data encryption standard, and we started a fuss about whether the data encryption standard was strong enough. So that's how I got involved with Hellman.
Excellent. So was there debate as to whose name would go first, or?
I think mine went first because it was alphabetically first.
Alphabetical, I was going to say. Okay. That would have been my guess.
So an important point is, I mean, the Diffie-Hellman algorithm is only, it's one of several algorithms in public key cryptography. What I would, I'm going to take credit. I'd take more credit for the notion of asymmetry in cryptography and the fact that you could have components, keys, and components of keys that you made public while there were others that you kept secret.
Mm. What is your kind of opinion as to what's happened since then? And we've covered security news for the past 8 years. We've talked a lot about there's this flaw in SSL, or there's this great implementation of the key exchange. Kind of what's your kind of summary of what's happened over the last several years with cryptography, and
Well,
particularly the Diffie-Hellman?
at the level of cryptographic algorithms, we think we're doing very well. From there, it goes straight downhill. Crypto implementation isn't, usually isn't very good. Operating systems are dreadful. Application security is dreadful. Protocol security isn't so good. So it's amazing that cryptography is as vital as it is as a field. I mean, there's a meeting next week in Santa Barbara that will have hundreds of people at it, and they aren't all old farts like me. There are people, occasionally we get high school students, have a significant number of undergraduates and lots of graduate students. And I think that's because of the intrinsic intellectual interest of the field.
Mm.
But as a practical matter, it's perfectly plausible that we've solved that piece of the problem. It's certainly the best cooked part of information security, but everything else about the field is dreadful.
Do you ever get people that come up to you and say, "Hey, I read the algorithm and I understand it, and I think I can make it better, or I think I can come up with my own"?
Well, probably, and surely a number of people have. I mean, if you're looking for forefront, the brief history of this these number theoretic things is that Diffie-Hellman works over quite a variety of arithmetic structures. RSA only works in the one case, only works in arithmetic modular integers. But the big discovery in the mid late 80s was that you can make Diffie-Hellman and the related El-Gamal signature algorithm work over what are called elliptic curve groups. And so you can make all the numbers much smaller. You can get them down from thousands of bits to hundreds of bits, which is very convenient. So, I mean, a lot of people, we didn't say the last word in this field.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big open issues now, and in respect in which cryptography is not a closed, by no means a solved problem, is that the most conspicuous threat is what's called quantum computing, which finds cycles in these structures very well, and all the kind of public key systems I was involved with involve hidden cycle lengths, and what's called Shor's algorithm finds them very quickly. So if the physicists deliver on quantum computing, it will badly damage all of the current public key systems. And so people are returning to looking at coding theory based or knapsack based various other kinds of approaches.
Now, couldn't you also use quantum computing to implement better cryptographic algorithms?
Well, maybe you could, but at the very least, there's going to be a window of vulnerability there, because for some period of time, quantum computers presumably will be things that may be large. They have to be run in supercooled refrigerators. I don't know exactly. I mean, that latter way in particular is characteristic of some of these things, and so the distance between that and something, SSL is the most widely deployed piece of crypto security ever, right? There are billions of them probably. And it'll be a long time before you can use quantum computing in your laptop. So in between, there'll be a period when you're using our current computing to do your encryption, and somebody may be using quantum computing to attack it.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever think about the uses for the algorithms that you created, and how bad people might use the algorithms and kind of toil with that situation, or are bad people going to do bad things, and that's going to happen regardless?
Now, I've never lost any sleep over that. One, I mean, I don't think uh, the I don't see any great reason to assume that the course of cryptography, it might have taken a while or something like that. It might have looked a bit different, but it's clear that there are plenty of smart people working in cryptography, and so I think all stripes of people, whether you like their politics or not, um, are going to be able to make use of these techniques. Now, as to whether, did I think about what it would be used for? Yeah, my fantasy in the mid 70s was securing all the telephones in North America. Right. So that's in some sense
Now,
what led to public key. If
yep.
you want to have 100 million secure telephones in the country, you can't um, you can't do it so readily by the conventional techniques.
Now, when you say securing the telephones, is that do you mean
I meant
preventing?
encrypting all the speech.
Okay, so preventing eavesdropping.
Right.
In that preventing it from each other, preventing it from our own government,
Well,
foreign
preventing it.
governments?
Hopefully, I was very ambitious. So I had this notion that a phone call should not be understandable by anyone other than the people talking on it.
Right. Right.
Period.
Hmm. And that came true today, right?
Sorry.
That's true today, correct?
Well, I mean, I think you can do it, but nobody's
Yes.
succeeded in doing it on any large scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the government had a network with 500,000 secure phones. I don't know what the number is right
Hmm.
now. People like Quiet Circle have very nice security products, but I don't know how many subscribers they have.
Hmm. Interesting. So, when we start talking about privacy, you've authored a book, Privacy on the Line, The Politics of Wiretapping and Encryption. Now, yeah, I couldn't not ask you about current events, right? Being the author, of this book, and so, what is your take on the current events and the recent happenings with the NSA, the Edward Snowden leak, and this basic notion of really somewhat compelling evidence that our own government is spying on us?
Oh, well, I hadn't doubted that for a very long time, though.
Mm,
Uh, though the information that's come out makes it all a lot more concrete and visceral. And it seems, my major. I haven't published anything yet on this. My major policy response has been to think that you know the clear failure is on the part of Congress to assert its role, to do its job. And the key thing is that the executive branch has gotten away with making it very difficult for Congress, and these tricks, saying they'll tell senators things, but they won't let them take notes, they won't let them talk to their staffs, etc. And they claim that there's an executive privilege. It seems to me what's much clearer than that in the Constitution is is the power of the purse on the part of Congress. So I think Congress, it needs to maybe revamp its own clearance procedure. I understand it has one, but
mm,
it should assert that it is responsible for the clearances of members, the clearances of staff, and that any agency that wants to get funded is going to come down and explain to Congress on Congress's terms, leave any documents that Congress says it wants with them, and that the funding hearings will be the bottom line of of the functioning of the government.
has it gotten so large that even if we had
Has what gotten so large?
the government and government agencies and the number of contractors that government agencies employ to do this kind of work that conceivably is for good, right? They're trying to find intelligence that will help defend the nation, but hasn't gotten so large that it's almost impossible to control. I read some statistic that there are more contractors that have clearance levels than there are actual government employees, for example.
Well, that might be true. I don't know. That's all documented to death in a book called Top Secret America. Uh, but I don't know whether something gets too large. I mean, it's a large activity, but it's by no means the majority of the government, right? I don't think it's anything like as large as the military,
Mm.
let alone uh, other major government activities. So I don't know. I don't know how to count the size in this matter.
Mm.
I mean, do think what's sort of interesting, right, is that they are worried about the discretion of Congress, which has 535 members, and I don't know how many staff per member. Possibly, would it average 10? I don't know offhand, but say, a total of very small number of tens of thousands of people, I assume at most, work for Congress. Uh, but whereas there seem to be, uh, something like 1 million people, according to these books, with special intelligence clearances. So what's amazing is that it's taken so long. They've really been amazingly good at persuading people to keep their mouths shut.
Mm. Mm. Interesting. Along those lines, do you think privacy is dead?
I don't know what privacy is, and I don't know whether anybody else does.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think the thing that's worrisome about the current world is not that people know things about you, but that people you have no way of knowing about know things about you. So people like to talk about, there not being any privacy in small towns. But the critical thing about small towns is that you know much the same things about your neighbors they know about you, which makes them answerable uh, at many levels for what they do with the information. And this is true all sorts of social groups. Whereas if you look at anything from NSA to Equifax to ChoicePoint, etc., all of these organizations have tremendous capacity to find out um, about you, and you have essentially no capacity to find out about them. Although I have to credit my wife, said months ago, I think this is going to turn out to cut both ways. And if we have no privacy, it's going to turn out they have no privacy. And I
Hmm.
was skeptical and worried, and I said, I think organizational security is getting more and more credit in society, and this, that, and the other. And then Snowden came along, so I get to play the know-it-all, husband with his comeuppance role.
How does the government in this case, particularly the NSA, do they have to work to build credibility back and gain trust to move forward? Recently General Alexander gave a talk at the popular Black Hat conference, and when I read and watched some of the videos and read the proceedings, it seemed like a lot in the security community, especially, had kind of lost faith in trust. Any trust they had for someone like the NSA, for example, is completely gone.
Um, well, and the first element of trust is what you're trusting people to do. Now, disclosure: I'm overall a fan of signals intelligence,
Hmm.
um, and I don't know how to solve. So one of the big problems is that, unlike cryptography, you cannot really do signals intelligence in public. If you rub people's nose in it that you're reading their traffic every time you do it, they'll do something about it and not make your job harder.
Yep.
Fine.
Yep.
On the other, so my proposal about Congress is, I'm kind of inclined toward what a lot of people said, that it's fine to have secrecy about details, but that you really shouldn't have secrecy about the whole scope of the activity. Um, in particular, I mean, it seems to me one of the most worrying things that we've had is this, you know, uh, Kafka-esque phenomenon that the real law is the secret executive branch interpretation of the law. And I think that extends much more widely than the intelligence stuff. So I've been bothered for a while. I mean, I knew about classified legal opinions for quite some time. Well, so did people in general. I mean, that was true, say, of the torture memos and things like that. But that vast range of government operations are governed not by some law that you can read, but by some arcane legal interpretation of the law that you can't. That seems very, very threatening to having any sort of democracy.
Are there things that we can do in order to maintain our privacy, or is it a lost cause?
Well, as I said, since I'm not sure what privacy is,
Mm.
um, loosely speaking, it has no chance against human autonomy. Doesn't seem to have a lot of chance against increasing communications. Sort of look at it at the high and the low. Right? At the time of the founding of the country, the president, gave orders to a general, said, go do this, and heard the general's report months later about what had been done. And, the general got court-martialed or commended or something, depending on whether the president liked what he'd done.
Mm-hmm.
Look forward to something like the attack on the Liberty, right? The general belief there is that the commander of the Sixth Fleet tried to protect the Liberty and was directly ordered by Washington to get his planes back on the carrier decks. So the autonomy of a general who's commanding, one of half a dozen or dozen major U.S. fleets in the world, just directly gets called by his boss and told what to do, sort of on a moment-to-moment basis. Looking at another case much further down the stack, 20 years ago, 25, a truck driver had a pretty autonomous job. Yes, his boss says, pick up this load in Maine and get it to San Diego by the end of the week. And so the driver has, 5 or 6 or 7 days or something to drive across the country. As long as he gets there in time and doesn't use too much extra gas, his boss isn't really going to care what route he takes. Not going to be too concerned, might care in principle, but not going to try to do anything about it if the driver picks up another load somewhere along the line and detours a little to take that because he's got some empty space. Well, now they all are being tracked by GPS. And I don't know the details, but I wouldn't be surprised if a driver gets a call from his boss if he's an hour behind schedule or an hour ahead of schedule or 10 miles off the route. Mm. And so I think it's easy to imagine a world in which not only you have no privacy, but you have very little independence. Right. Now you ask another question, which is more a tactical question. It's not a question about, decades, but about months or years. Can we do something to improve our privacy? And I assume the answer is yes. But so far, I don't think most of the attempts to do this have been very successful, because all of the things, basically, to be a big enterprise, to affect a lot of people, something has to be a business success. And as far as I can tell, business and privacy don't seem to be very compatible. That what has proved to be the route to riches has been intruding on your customers' privacy, and people have been very successful at getting away with it. So the people in business to protect privacy are so far niche businesses. Wicker, Quiet Circle, these two, this one that closed down its email, Lava something recently, and the giant companies have all, as far as I can see, pretty much lined up on the side of the view that they can do anything with it, that they can do anything with anything they learn about their customers that they like.
Did you guys have other questions for Whit, Carlos, Jack Allison, Larry?
Negative.
Steve?
I'm still just in awe of the man himself.
Processing.
Yes.
Where is the hummingbird algorithm, and where would it be optimal?
Well, it's an algorithm designed to use minimal electrical power, because in a lot of things like smart cards or RFID, wireless sensor networks, you have a very low power budget, and you don't have a battery. Maybe you may be operating on radiated power. So that was the objective of that algorithm. The company that was pushing it has closed down, been reincarnated, is not looking terribly lively, and as a result of a presentation we made at NSA 2 years ago, I think NSA liked the the problem we presented, but didn't like the solution, and they went and designed a couple of algorithms of their own
Hmm.
with a very similar criterion. They emphasized minimal gate count, which is not exactly the same as minimal power consumption, but they're closely related. And then they did a really strange thing. I had heard they were designing against this problem, and I figured they'd build something the military would use it or something like that. But no, what they did was they published it. That was nice. The other interesting thing was they didn't publish it on their own website. They published it on, quote, ours. That is to say, the website of the International Association for Cryptologic Research.
Hmm.
So this is just 2 months ago in June. But as a matter of fact, it's not quite 2 months ago. It's June 20th. This paper appeared with two algorithms called Simon and Spec, one more oriented toward hardware, the other one more oriented toward software, and both, to my mind, very straightforward. Hummingbird is a really novel design. It's very interesting, but that gives you marketing problems of explaining it to everybody, getting it evaluated, etc. And so I think this may portend a very serious piece of competition.
Hmm. Interesting. When it comes to security in general, you mentioned before that we have this problem with software security, right? And that really, I think, is probably in my list of top 5 problems that we have now. We are looking at software security is probably being in that list for sure. And how do you think that someday we'll solve these problems? Do you think that we'll be looking back on the problems we have today, 10, 20, 30 years from now, going, wow, that was a real pain in the butt back then, but we've solved that problem. Do you foresee us going there? Do you have, some
Well, I probably
projections?
would have thought that 10, 20, or 30 years ago. So anything I say, is kind of suspect. Let me sort of pose this question back to you.
Hmm.
Would these problems have been solved if the big players really wanted them solved?
Mm.
So I ask myself, do the giant companies really want their users to be secure against them? So do they want you to have absolute configuration control over what runs on your computer? Right? And there are a whole bunch of things that suggest to me that they don't. So I was told, I'm not a Microsoft user, so I don't know their stuff firsthand, but I was told that some versions of Windows contractually obliged you to accept updates. And that's because they they anticipated changes in digital rights management that weren't in your interest, and so you were being obliged to accept changes that made the software worse from your point of view.
Mm.
Um, the I am a little skeptical. Do you think that? Oh, and the other thing, something called the Trusted Computing Group was organized to put things called trusted platform modules into
Yes.
computers, and they are in a lot of them. And for something like the electric power grid, that's a great idea. The trusted platform module controls the controls what the computer can say to other parts of the network about how it's configured. But in consumer electronics, this seems to me just a dreadful idea. And the original internet notion that you have standardized interfaces but proprietary implementations is exactly the right thing for progress, for individual autonomy, uh, everything else. And right now, you already find, I mean, my Wells Fargo won't accept my talking to it with anything other than the standard browsers, Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, maybe something else, but it doesn't like wget. And in principle, one could send it the right signals and fool it, but the result is I can't write a program to process my bank statement at all as readily as I would like.
Hmm.
And if they could force me to enforce my configuration with trusted platform module, then maybe they would have something standing between me and doing that. That's more than the fact that I have other things that are more important to do than learn more about about those protocols.
Is that what you mean in your talk? A secure internet could not serve our needs? Is that kind of
No,
along
I think
this?
what I mean in that is that classic secure networks were meant for friends to talk to each other. When you talk about Autoden or Cybernet or any of these government networks that have been secured, they means all in principle everybody who has access to the network is somebody with some level of clearance and is a Yankee or from one of the Five Eyes countries or whatever the criteria are. The critical thing about the internet is that it's meant for people who aren't friends to talk to each other.
Mm.
And in a vague sense, that was true of the telephone system, but the telephone system was so much human mediated, it didn't have the same issues the internet has.
So, why is crime essential to the internet?
Well, I think it's just because, I think crime is essential to life. I look at something that's commonly called a crime, like, you come home from dinner and somebody's kicked in your front door and stolen your TV. And, the criminal goes off and sells the TV to a fence for $50, and maybe the fence sells it to somebody else for 75, and that end of the trail kind of dies off. And you call the police, and a couple of them who are making, I don't know what police make, 25 to 50 an hour or something. They come around, they talk to you for half an hour, and they make a report, and then a detective or two come around, and they're making 50 to 75 an hour, and they talk to you for half an hour, and then the next day you call the locksmith, and the locksmith comes over and repairs your door, and that's a few $100s. And the insurance adjuster comes around, and he talks to you for half an hour, and goes off, and eventually insurance pays off, and you buy a new TV, and altogether, several $1,000s worth of legitimate business that has grown out of this. Out of this theft of your TV that made almost no money for the criminals. So it's just my impression. uh, I haven't done any serious sociological study. It's my impression that crime, the things that are called crime, are a very big part of the economy. And if the internet is to serve the economy, it's got to serve every aspect of the economy.
I was always told growing up that crime doesn't pay, but you've changed my viewpoint on that.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, a lot of things ought to have changed your viewpoint. Have you looked? Have you looked at how some of the drug barons live? I told it raised eyebrows when Forbes listed a number of the drug billionaires among the wealthiest people in the world for the first time a few years ago.
Well, in your model, it doesn't pay to be a criminal. It
But
pays
the other
to,
point is, there's almost nobody. I mean, I don't think you'd even find absolutely universal agreement that Mother Teresa wasn't a criminal. I mean, there's almost some people, a country doctor, most people think that person's okay. A hit person, most people think that person isn't okay. And in between, there's everybody else. And some people like that job, and other people don't like that job.
Mm. So, it kind of playing off that. How will the internet be different in the next 50 or 100 years? In what you just described, it almost sounds like I kind of think of things as, well, the problems that we have are going to get better, but well, kind of what you're saying is that crime is an essential component of it, and it will always be there. Is there some kind of dial that's going to happen where there's going to be a lot of crime, and then maybe it'll go down? And what, in your opinion, is going to happen with that over the next?
I don't know. I mean, I think my vision of 100 years from now um, is no better than it ought to be. Although I did write a paper about cryptography 1,000 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
I was firmly sure I wouldn't be around to answer for the mistakes. Actually, I think if I live 100 years, I'll probably live 1,000. But I think I kind of think that the second half of the century will be. I mean, look, what I don't know, the problem dominates life now. Maybe that's slightly exaggeration, but the interrelationship, maybe confrontation between people and machines, is a vast and growing aspect of society. One, economically, loosely, as in the machines are taking our jobs. An automated teller machine, an automated gas pump, those really function like an employee or a gas jockey more than they function the way a lathe helps a machinist make something. At another level, the explosion of machines to control people, all of these detailed access control and monitoring systems for every environment. So I think that basically it doesn't look at all the way the science fiction writers saw it, with the single exception of that wonderful story of Logic named Joe, which foresaw the workstation, taking over from the telephone in 1946. But by and large, I think the robots versus people fight was not seen very clearly. But I think, in fact, that is going to dominate near human history, and that the distinction between people and machines will decline dramatically. I don't know if it'll go away, but I think we all going to be cyborgs maybe in 20 years, certainly in 50, and I thought 40 years ago I said I thought there would be designed human beings by the end of the 21st century. It now looks to me like we're focusing in on the end of the first quarter. So, how will the internet be different?
Is it going to be anything like it was in The Matrix, or probably not?
Sorry, I haven't read The Matrix. I'm illiterate.
Probably not that stylized and cool. But.
No, I just haven't read The Matrix. I can brag that Arthur C. Clarke told me to read Cryptonomicon, but I haven't read that yet either, though I did buy a copy on the basis of his recommendation. So I don't know. So I don't know what it said in The Matrix, but
I was referring to the movie Keanu Reeves.
Oh yeah, I didn't see the movie either. So
it's exactly it's all about.
And I was waiting for a more advanced one. It was going to be called The Tensor, right? I thought this, well, let's move up a little in dimensions in our mathematics.
Well, it's all about people versus machines, pretty much exactly as you described.
Well, and as I don't think it's. I don't know whether that they had it right or not, but. So if you ask about the internet in particular, well, will we still be calling it the internet? I don't know the answer to that. I think almost certainly whatever it is will, by 100 years from now, have confronted the sort of interplanetary aspect of it that Vint Cerf and some people have been, I've forgotten what they call it, SolarNet or something like that. But communications really do become different when you're looking at hours of delay and you need so forth. Will we still do it packetized? My imagination doesn't run to something better, but that my imagination didn't particularly run to packets 50 years ago. So right. I don't know the answer to that. Will we I don't know. Will we think of it? I mean, one of the things the internet is doing is blurring distinctions between communication and computation. So right now we're sort of in the infancy of presenting ourselves over the communications medium, having that as a major enhancement of what we are. And that's kind of Star Wars holodeck-like. But I don't see why there shouldn't be a huge amount of that. And in one respect, you might have growing autonomy in the way that there's people who live major online lives and present a persona. The more computers you have working to implement your persona, the more scales you can have on your dragon.
Or less clothing you could have on your avatar.
Right, exactly. Actually, clothing. This is a wonderful thing. In Second Life, I saw two people dancing together, and the woman's skirt the guy is inside the woman's skirt. It just flows around him, not because that represents some aesthetic or political or anything statement. It's just it's easier to compute.
I love it. So I've got 5 now. The 5 most.